Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be answering one very simple question: will the raids be harder in TBC Classic? Before we jump in guys, I've got loads of TBC videos coming very soon, so make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to help out and don't miss those uploads. But anyway, let's jump in. Now the first thing we actually need to discuss is difficulty itself. It's always subjective to different environments and different people and yada yada. So I think there's a big difference in the difficulty of mechanics and the difficulty of preparation when you're comparing TBC to Classic WoW. Classic WoW raids are very difficult without preparation, without consumables or world buffs or anything like that, but with too much preparation, such as decking out in consumables and world buffs, then the raids become too easy. Plus the prep itself isn't really that difficult, since you just have to farm gold and resources. The next thing you also have to understand is the difference between mechanical difficulty and mathematical difficulty. Okay, is the boss hard because the tactics are hard to perform and coordinate with 25 other people, or do the boss mechanics just do truckloads of damage that you can't deal with without good gear and consumables? A good example would be the difference between Low-Feb in vanilla Naxxramas and Lich King Naxxramas. In vanilla, the difficulty is the fact that the impending Doom debuff does so much damage to the raid that you cannot survive without consumables, especially as you're getting no healing. But the fight itself is mechanically very simple. In Wrath of the Lich King, the debuff is nerfed slightly. It prevents all healing, but there is a small time window for the healers to actually top everyone up, so they need to coordinate their AoE healing together and stack together, and there's also a little bit of a tank swap to worry about, so that's mechanically a little bit more difficult. But you don't need to farm loads and loads of gold before you turn up to that raid to get shadow protection potions, so there's a big difference. So what about TBC? Okay, in TBC the difficulty shifts from mathematical difficulty more to mechanical difficulty on the large parts anyway. In TBC the fights aren't that different from retail raiding in my opinion. The only reason retail raiding looks more complicated is because there's better visual effects. Okay, retail is designed to work on better hardware than hardware from 14 years ago. Obviously I'm excluding mythic raiding to what I'm talking about here, but TBC raiding isn't that different from retail raiding, okay? It just has less flashing lights. It's like comparing Morecambe to Blackpool Pleasure Beach. It's probably a very weird metaphor that only people who live down the street from me are actually going to understand, but oh well. Because if you really strip World of Warcraft raiding down, it still is only about moving your character to certain locations, killing mobs in a certain order, or right-clicking stuff in a boss room. It's also very important to bear in mind that it seems like Blizzard are taking meticulous care going boss to boss to tune them in different ways to make them difficult to players, by obviously releasing them in their pre-nerf state, but also simultaneously nerfing some of the very irritating guild disbanding mechanics that were needlessly difficult. So now that we have all this knowledge and we can bear it all in mind, we can actually answer the question properly, okay? In my opinion, the bosses will mechanically be more difficult. To be honest, there's even Elite Quest enemies in Outlander with more mechanics than Molten Core. I think on average, the raids will ramp up in difficulty by about 40%, okay? That's obviously subjective to me and my experience of playing both the games and my skill as a player, but it's definitely not twice as difficult. I just think it's a little bit more difficult. Your first time stepping into TBC raiding as an average guild will be like doing Naxxramas, but fully consumed with decent gear but without world buffs, okay? That's the best rough comparison I can make, because remember how different difficulty is in Classic WoW compared to TBC. Tier 4 is going to be the easiest raiding experience for the majority of people, since most of Karazhan has fairly simple bosses. However, the last boss, Prince, and the optional bosses Nightbane and Neverspite are a little bit more challenging. Nightbane is an absolute tank killer and Neverspite is a little technical, especially for people who are inexperienced. Then Prince honestly is a little bit of an RNG fight, because you just have to hope that the Infernals do not land on your raid. You can get very lucky on Prince and it can actually be quite easy. It's just a very long fight that you have to survive throughout. Gruul and Maggie they're fairly challenging because they require every member of the raid to be switched on to respond to the mechanics. You can't have like 10 people who know the mechanics and 20 people who don't. Everyone needs to understand the mechanics, but once you actually understand the mechanics are fairly simple. Okay, it's one of those situations. In Tier 5, things will start to ramp up even more in difficulty, especially the last boss of Tempest Keep, which is largely considered by many in the community to be the hardest boss in the Burning Crusade, although this might be slightly distorted by the private server community because private servers overtune the content, so that I might have different interactions with how it's actually going to be when we get TBC Classic, but to be honest, I think it will just end up being the hardest boss in the whole game, to be honest. But then again, like, there might be some random boss that they don't nerf in BT or somewhere plateau that ends up being more difficult. Who knows? Only time will tell. And then Tier 6 it's nice and challenging. 2 big raids that provide some of the biggest challenges when it comes to boss mechanics that TBC has to offer, so progression will be steady for most guilds, particularly as those raids are so big. So let me conclude. Raids will step up in difficulty, but step down when it comes to preparation. Still a decent amount of preparation is actually needed for TBC raids, like resist gear for tanks, consumables, and crafting best in slot gear, but definitely not as much as Classic. And to make up for that, the boss mechanics will be a little more sophisticated and challenging. But anyway guys, that's where I'm going to end the video there. Stay tuned for more TBC content coming very frequently on this channel, you know, for the next, well, forever, for the next 2 years I guess. My name is MetaGoblin. To my next video, ciao.